When I first started working at the new hospital, I thought I'd gotten lucky. It was clean, bright, and still smelled faintly of paint and new drywall. The floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the halls were quiet, and everything about it felt untouched, brand new. They'd built it on the outskirts of town, off a two-lane road surrounded by old farmland. From the parking lot, you could still see the rolling fields stretching for miles, dotted with what was left of a few barns, some half-collapsed fences, and clusters of trees. The first few weeks were uneventful. Routine shifts, light patient loads, and a staff that was still getting used to the place. Everyone was adjusting, learning where things were. You could get lost in the maze of identical corridors. But little by little, things started to feel wrong. It began with the call buttons. You know, those buttons patients press when they need assistance. They light up at the nurse's station and trigger a tone that's impossible to ignore. The problem was they'd go off in empty rooms. At first, we blamed it on wiring. The place was new, maybe the system was still glitchy. But when maintenance checked, they couldn't find a problem. Everything tested fine. Still, every so often, a call light would flash from a room that hadn't been used in days. We'd go in, no patients, no visitors, lights off, bed perfectly made. Sometimes the intercom would even crackle faintly, like someone had pressed the call button to talk, but the only sound that came through was static. It was easy to brush off at first. Hospitals are full of noise, vents, machines, pipes that knock, elevators that hum. You learn to tune it out. But the new building had a silence to it that made every small sound carry. You could hear your own footsteps echo in the halls late at night. Then there was the TV. On the third floor, there was a small waiting area. Just a couch, a couple of chairs, a coffee machine, and a mounted television. It wasn't used much since the wing was still partially closed. But every night, around 2 or 3 a.m., someone would find the TV turned on. Always on the same channel. Always with the volume down low. Security checked the cameras. No one had gone in or out for hours. A few nurses started to joke about our ghost patient. It was harmless talk, something to laugh about during long shifts. But not everyone found it funny, especially not the night staff. One of them was Mariah, a young housekeeper who mainly worked in the OR section. She was quiet, polite, the kind of person who kept her head down and just did her job. The OR area was badge restricted, meaning only authorized staff could enter. She had her own equipment cart, which she kept inside, stocked with disinfectants, brushes, and floor polishers. I remember one morning she came up to me in the break room looking pale. Her hands were trembling a little as she stirred her coffee. She said, "Can I ask you something weird?" I told her sure. Then she told me that when she'd gone in to clean one of the ORs the night before, her tools had been moved. Not just shifted, lined up on the floor beside her cart, like someone had taken them out and arranged them neatly in a row. I asked if someone else might have gone in, but she shook her head. Her access log showed no other badges used after hers. She tried to laugh it off, said maybe she was tired, perhaps she just forgot how she left things. But the next week it happened again, and the week after that. Every time she'd go back to her cart, she'd find her supplies sitting on the floor, perfectly arranged, gloves, spray bottles, brushes, even her mask folded in half like someone had taken the time to do it. She started working faster after that, refusing to stay alone in the OR wing. Then one night she sent me a text. It was a photo of one of the OR's computer monitors. The monitor was off, but she said she felt as if she were being watched, so she snapped a picture. She wrote, "Tell me if I'm crazy." I opened it, and at first I didn't see anything, just her reflection faintly in the glass. But when I lightened the image and zoomed in, I froze. There were faces, 3 of them, faint, blurred, like misty impressions just behind her reflection. One looked like it was right over her shoulder. When I showed her, she didn't say anything, just stared at the phone for a long time and whispered, "I knew it." She quit that week. Around that time, one of our coworkers, a quiet guy named Alan, started digging into the land's history. He was one of those amateur historians, constantly reading about local places. He told us that before the hospital, the area had been part of a massive plantation back in the 1800s. The section where the hospital now stands used to be the site of the slave quarters. The farmhouse itself had burned down sometime in the early 1900s and no one ever rebuilt. 4 years, the land just sat there, overgrown and empty, until the county sold it for development. He even found old newspaper clippings and census maps showing a small cemetery near the back edge of the property. When construction started, they had to move a few graves to make room for the new parking lot. That was when people stopped joking about ghosts. The more time passed, the stranger things got. I personally saw 2 people disappear. I still don't have an explanation for it. The first was during a late shift. I was walking down the corridor toward the staff lounge when I noticed a man standing at the far end. He looked like a visitor. Clean shirt, slacks, hands in his pockets. I remember because visitors weren't supposed to be there that late. I started to call out to him, but before I could, he turned the corner, or at least I thought he did. When I reached the intersection seconds later, there was no one there. Both hallways were empty. The second time was even worse. It was around 5 a.m., quiet as usual, and I was heading toward the elevator when I saw a woman in a patient gown standing near the nurse's station. She was looking down the hall as if she were lost. I took a few steps toward her, and as I opened my mouth to ask if she needed help, she was just gone. When I told one of the nurses, she just gave me this tired look and said, "You saw her too?" It was around then that people started talking about the stockroom on the basement level. That floor was mainly storage, shelves of supplies, cleaning chemicals, old furniture, and boxes of unused equipment. It always smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, with that damp, closed-up scent you get in basements. Several employees claimed to have seen a misty shape there. Not smoke, not dust, something that looked like fog forming in the corner, moving slowly across the room and then vanishing. I went down there once during a supply run and thought I heard whispering, just faint enough to make me doubt it. When I stopped moving, it stopped too. For a long time, I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen or heard. It was easier to pretend I hadn't noticed anything. But that changed one night in late November. I was covering an overnight shift, filling in for a coworker. It was around 2 a.m., and the hospital was at its quietest, a kind of silence where you could hear the hum of every machine. I was on the third floor, checking the nurse's station logs, when I heard the call button tone. Room 312. That was an empty room. The hallway lights seemed dimmer than usual. My shoes squeaked softly against the waxed floor as I walked. When I reached the room, the door was slightly open. Inside, everything looked normal. The bed made, the equipment off, the curtains drawn. But the air felt colder, like I'd walked into a refrigerator. I stepped in and said quietly, "Hello?" No answer. I walked to the bedside panel and the call light was still lit. I pressed the reset button. The tone stopped. Then behind me I heard a faint exhale. I turned, but no one was there. Just the empty room, silent except for the low hum of the ventilation. And then the TV in the waiting area down the hall turned on by itself. The faint glow reflected down the corridor, soft and flickering. For a moment I thought I saw something move, a figure standing in the doorway of the next room. But when I walked toward it, the TV went black again, and everything was still. The next morning when I told Alan, he said something that stuck with me. He said, "Maybe they're not trying to scare anyone. Maybe they just want to be noticed." That thought changed something in me. I stopped being afraid and started listening. Sometimes late at night, I'd pause in the hallway when a call light flickered or when a whisper echoed faintly from the walls. I'd say softly, "It's okay. You're not alone." And strangely enough, the disturbances became less frequent. The room stayed quiet. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe not. Months passed. Mariah moved to another job, Alan got promoted, and the new hospital slowly filled with life, real life. Families visiting, babies being born, people recovering. The building no longer felt empty. Even the strange cold spots faded, the call button stopped lighting up without reason, and the basement didn't feel as heavy. It felt like peace. Sometimes when I walk past room 312, I pause for a moment and whisper a quiet thank you for letting us work there, for finally resting. I still have that photo Mariah sent me, the one with the faint faces in the reflection. When I look at it now, the shapes are almost gone and faded completely into the dark. Maybe that's what they wanted all along, to be seen, remembered, and then finally free. I work as a nurse in the post-surgical unit at the city's largest hospital. Patients come from hundreds of miles away to be treated here. The surgeons are famous, their names whispered like a guarantee of survival. We see life and death every day, so maybe it's not surprising that strange things linger here. What we don't tell the patients, what we're not allowed to say to them, is that this hospital has ghosts. It's something every nurse learns eventually. People die here, some peacefully, some not. And sometimes, it feels like a part of them doesn't move on. The hospital itself is old, built over what used to be farmland. There's an old photo in the lobby from when the land still had wooden barns and a narrow dirt road cutting through the fields. Before it became a hospital, this ground had been home to slave quarters. I didn't know that until years later when I started noticing the way specific corridors felt colder than others. The building hums at night, machines beep, vents breathe, wheels echo faintly down empty halls. It's normal until it isn't. I've had nights where I could swear someone was standing behind me, close enough that I could feel the weight of their breath. And when I turned, there was only the faint smell of antiseptic and something older, like wet earth and iron. I've learned not to react too loudly. Screaming isn't exactly encouraged on night shift. The first patient who mentioned them was a woman recovering from abdominal surgery. She told me she couldn't sleep because people kept whispering in the dark. There are 3 of them, she said, eyes wide, clutching the blanket like a lifeline. They stand by the beds and talk to each other, but I can't understand what they're saying. She was alone in a 4-bed ward. I pulled back every curtain, showed her the empty beds myself. No visitors, no staff, no one there. She looked at me with this desperate hope that I'd explain it away, that I'd say something logical. So I told her it was probably the meds, that sometimes painkillers mess with your dreams. She nodded slowly, but she didn't look convinced. A few weeks later, another patient, same room, said the same thing. Whispering voices, 3 of them, the same beds. I remember how my stomach dropped when she said it. I smiled anyway and said the exact reassuring words, but my hands were cold the rest of the night. We don't share stories like that with patients. People come here to heal, not to fear, so we keep it to ourselves. Some nurses have their own rules. Never sleep in the storage room on the south side. Never whistle in the hallway outside or 3 after midnight. Never answer if someone calls your name from the end of the hall when you're alone. I used to laugh at that. I don't anymore. I once took my break in that same storage room everyone avoided. I wanted to prove nothing was wrong with it. The air was heavy, smelling faintly of disinfectant and dust. There was an old mop leaning in the corner, and the hum of a distant vent filled the silence. I closed my eyes just for a minute. When I woke up, I couldn't move. My eyes were open, but my body refused to obey. Someone, was standing in the corner. A shadow darker than the dark around it. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. I just watched. When I tried to scream, my throat locked. I could feel my pulse hammering in my neck, feel the sweat slide down my temple. The light switch wouldn't work. The door wouldn't open. The shadow crept closer. Each second stretched until I thought I'd go insane from waiting for it to touch me. And then, nothing. I blinked and I was sitting up on the couch, heart racing, the lights humming softly overhead like nothing had happened. I told myself it was just sleep paralysis. That's what everyone says. But I never slept there again. The worst part of working nights isn't the ghosts. It's quiet. You start noticing every sound. The ticking 4 pumps, the soft shuffling of slippered feet down empty corridors, the creak of old walls settling. Last week, during one of those endless night shifts, another nurse told me a story that's been living rent-free in my head ever since. We were sitting in the break room, 2 old couches, a TV that never works, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. She looked tired, her voice low. She said she'd been sleeping on the couch during her break when a bright light woke her up. There's a small adjoining room through a glass window, lockers, a sink, a bathroom. I thought someone left the light on, she said, but then I looked at the glass. I asked what she saw. A woman was standing there, on the other side of the glass, staring straight ahead. Her description made my blood run cold. She had her hair in this old-fashioned style, the nurse said, curled and pinned up like women used to wear in the 70s, and her scrubs, blue pinstripes with a white nurse's cap. I could picture it. Those vintage uniforms they keep on display in the hospital lobby, from back when nurses wore crisp cotton instead of polyester. I yelled at her to turn the light off, she continued, but she didn't move, didn't even blink. The nurse pulled the blanket over her head and went back to sleep. When she woke later, the light was still on, but the woman was gone. The next morning she asked around. Nobody had gone in there. The door had been locked all night. She told me an older nurse recognized the description immediately, said it sounded just like a woman who used to work there years ago. She died driving home after a night shift, fell asleep at the wheel. Now, she said with a nervous laugh, every time I get sleepy driving home I think about her. Keeps me awake better than coffee. I smiled, but something about her story stuck with me, especially when I remembered what one of my patients had said the night before. She told me that sometimes she saw a woman peeking into her room. Blue scrubs, she said, old style. She just stands there, watching. I'd blamed the dilaudid. Pain meds can do that. Hallucinations, vivid dreams, confusion. I switched her to Tylenol, but now I wasn't so sure. When I went to check on her that night, she was awake, and there, in the doorway, was someone standing just beyond the light. A woman, blue pinstripe scrubs, white cap. Still as a photograph. My whole body froze. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, the hallway silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. The woman turned her head toward me, slow, deliberate, then walked down the side corridor. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, but I followed her anyway. At the end of the corridor, I turned the corner, and she was gone. There was only one door she could have gone through, room 9. When I entered, every patient inside was awake. Their monitors blinked softly in the dark. "It's freezing in here," one of them said. "Can I get a warm blanket?" "Of course," I replied. She jumped like she hadn't noticed me before. "Oh my goodness. You scared me. I thought you were still here." "Who?" I asked. "The other nurse. The one who just came in." My stomach dropped. I felt something move behind me, not a sound, just a shift in the air like static before lightning. When I turned the corner, it was empty. I fetched the blanket and left the room quickly. That night, no one in room 9 slept. They all complained of the same thing, that it felt like someone else was in bed with them, lying just inches away. Over the next week, the whispers grew. Patients murmured about a nurse who visited only at night, one who never spoke, only stood by their beds. One morning, a patient who'd been in room 9 stopped me as I was leaving. She'd had surgery on her heart and was still weak, but her eyes were sharp. "She saved me," she said quietly. I frowned. "Who did?" "The nurse in the blue scrubs. She woke me up last night. I couldn't breathe, my chest hurt so bad, and I swear she was right there shaking me awake. When I opened my eyes, she was gone, and then the machine started beeping." I checked her chart. Her oxygen had dropped dangerously low at 3:04 a.m., the exact time the alarm went off. That should have comforted me, but it didn't, because the security footage from the hall outside her room showed no one entering or leaving. The door never opened. I started digging, asked older nurses, checked the old staff photos in the archives near HR. And there she was. Second row, far left. Blue pinstripe scrubs, white cap, same smile. Her name was Margaret Holloway. She'd worked here from 1969 to 1978, died driving home after a double shift. She fell asleep at the wheel less than a mile from the hospital. The story went that she'd stayed late that night because a patient was coding, and she refused to leave until the patient was stable. I began to notice something after that. Every time a patient reported seeing her, it was right before something bad almost happened. And 4 about to infiltrate, a monitor about to flatline, a patient about to go into cardiac distress. It was as if she were still doing rounds and still protecting her patients. I stopped being afraid. One night, I was making my rounds at 3 a.m., that cursed hour again, when the power flickered. The hallway lights dimmed, humming unevenly. I saw her again, standing by the nurse's station. Her face was softer this time, less pale, almost kind. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I didn't feel cold. There was a warmth behind her eyes, like she recognized me. Then she turned toward room 14. I followed her. Inside, the patient's monitor was flatlining. The staff came running when I called for help, and we got her back. Barely. Afterwards, as the adrenaline faded, I stood alone in the hallway. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, like the lilies we keep at the chapel downstairs. For the first time I understood. Margaret wasn't haunting the hospital. She was guarding it. Every whisper, every cold draft, every glimpse in the glass. They weren't warnings of evil. There were warnings of danger. She wasn't trapped here. She'd chosen to stay. A few weeks later, a new nurse fell asleep driving home after a double shift. She crashed but survived. The officer said a passerby called for help immediately, but when paramedics arrived, no one else was there. The nurse swore she saw someone in old-fashioned scrubs pulling her from the car before it caught fire. Since that night, the hospital feels different. Still cold in places. Still heavy with history, but not as menacing. Sometimes during the night shift, I catch a glimpse of blue pinstripes reflected in the glass, and instead of fear, I feel this strange calm. If you stand quietly in the break room just before dawn, you might hear it too, the soft click of old shoes walking down the hall, making rounds that never ended. And every time I drive home after a long shift and my eyes start to close, I think about Margaret Holloway, and somehow I always stay awake. I used to work security at a psychiatric center back in the 1990s. It wasn't one of those quiet, candlelit places you see in movies. It was a sprawling, fluorescent-lit facility that smelled like bleach and overcooked coffee, humming with the sound of old vents and cheap intercoms. We handled everything: inpatients, outpatients, even the criminally insane. Part hospital, part prison. Most nights were long, uneventful stretches of silence broken by the occasional buzz of the front doors or the clatter of a dropped clipboard. But when things went bad there, they went really bad, and some nights never left me. The first thing you learned about working in a place like that was how sound carried. Screams traveled down the hallways and turned corners like smoke. You could never quite tell where they came from. There was always a faint hum from the old fluorescent lights above the security desk. They flickered sometimes, not enough to bother filing a report, but enough to make you feel watched. The whole building felt like it was holding its breath. On quiet nights, I'd sit behind the front desk, drinking bad coffee and watching the monitors. Sometimes I'd see my own reflection on the glass and mistake it for movement, but other times, it wasn't just my reflection. It was around 2 in the morning when the front doors buzzed open and a man stumbled in. He was shouting something I couldn't quite make out at first. When he got close enough for the light to hit his face, I saw the knife. He was covered in blood. Arms, chest, neck. It was everywhere. The metal glinted wet in his hand. "I want to kill myself," he screamed, voice cracking like he'd been shouting for hours. I froze for a second. Training kicked in, but instincts came first. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. My supervisor, an older guy named Ross, sprinted from his office. He pulled up the guy's record on the terminal and cursed under his breath. History of violence, hepatitis, multiple assaults on staff. He looked up at me. "Put him down, now." Those were his exact words. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a shield, a chair from the waiting area, and stepped toward the man. His eyes locked on mine. I could smell him, that sharp, coppery scent of blood mixed with sweat and disinfectant. He started to raise the knife. I didn't think. I just rammed the chair into him. The impact knocked him off balance and I hit him again, harder. He went down, the knife clattering across the tiles. Within seconds, staff came running. We piled on him, each person pressing down just enough to keep him from thrashing. His screams turned to sobs, then to this awful, choked laugh. When the sedatives hit, his body went limp. Ross was shouting in my face before I even stood up. "Did he touch you? Did he cut you? Tell me now." I looked down at my uniform, my gloves, my arms. There was blood everywhere. Not mine, I hoped. "I don't think so," I said. My voice sounded far away. They rushed me to get checked. The doctor's hands trembled as he inspected my forearms under the bright light. Every second felt like an hour. No cuts, no needle punctures, just someone else's blood soaking through the fabric. They burned my uniform that night. Afterward, the whole building seemed quieter, like the walls themselves were listening. People die in psychiatric wards all the time. Suicides, overdoses, strokes. Most go quietly, but others don't. There's something about working around death and desperation every night that changes the way you see people. I started noticing details I'd never seen before. The way certain patients stared at corners like someone was standing there, or how the lights above certain hallways would flicker even after being replaced. You start to wonder if maybe those who die there ever really leave. Months went by before the next incident. It was a weekend. Those were always unpredictable. 2 cops came in around midnight with a man in cuffs. He was tall, built like a brick wall, wearing a torn denim jacket. He didn't say a word, didn't even look up. His head hung low, his breathing shallow. The officers said he was found wandering behind a strip mall, muttering nonsense. When they tried to question him, he attacked one of them. Standard procedure. We take them to the secure observation room for assessment. 1 cop stays with him, the other comes back with me to fill out the intake forms. Everything felt routine. Too routine. Until my partner, Mike, who was watching the monitors, suddenly jumped out of his chair. "Alarm!" he shouted. The siren blared through the halls. We ran. The doors opened and chaos spilled out. The man was attacking the officer, swinging his handcuffs like a weapon. Blood sprayed across the walls. The clang of metal echoed in my skull. By the time we got there, the other cop had already pulled his weapon. The suspect went down hard, half conscious, blood pouring from a wound above his eye. The room stank of iron and sweat. "How the hell did this happen?" Ross barked, storming in. He was cuffed. I looked closer. Something was wrong with his hands. Both cuffs hung loose around his wrists. "Wait," I said, grabbing his arm. "What the hell?" His hands were slick with blood, but it wasn't just from the fight. Something about the shape looked wrong. He had no thumbs. Not missing fingernails. Not bandaged. Gone. Completely. The flesh where the thumbs should have been was smooth and pale, like it had healed years ago. The other cop turned his arm over, swore under his breath. "Holy shit." both hands, no thumbs. The cuffs had just slid off. We later found out the man had been missing both thumbs for years. Self-inflicted, they said. Some twisted ritual from whatever world he came from. But what haunted me wasn't the fight or the blood or even the officer's screams. It was the look on that man's face when they dragged him away. He looked relieved, like he'd been trying to get caught. After that night, things started feeling different around the facility. The air seemed heavier somehow. The hallways quieter. Staff started quitting one by one. Ross joked that the place was cursed, built on bad ground. Maybe he was right. You could feel it if you stayed there long enough. A tension under your skin like static before a storm. Sometimes, walking past the observation wing, I'd swear I could hear metal scraping against tile, like handcuffs dragging behind someone unseen. I checked the monitors. Nothing. But the sound would stop the second I looked. One night, I was doing rounds alone. It was 3 in the morning. Always the worst hour. The building hummed with the low, constant buzz of electricity and whispered air vents. As I turned down the main corridor, I saw movement through the reinforced glass window of the observation room. Someone was sitting on the bed. That wasn't unusual, except this room was supposed to be empty. I unlocked the door slowly, the heavy click echoing too loud in the silence. Inside, the air felt colder. The lights overhead flickered once, twice. The figure sat still on the bed, facing the wall. "Sir?" I said. "You're not supposed to be here." No response. I stepped closer. He turned his head slightly, just enough for the light to catch his face. It was the man with no thumbs. My throat went dry. I knew it couldn't be him. He'd been transferred weeks ago to a state facility miles away. But he was there, sitting in the same room, wearing the same torn jacket. I froze. He lifted his hands slowly, showing me the stumps where his thumbs used to be. The skin was pale like wax. Then he smiled. Not a full grin, just this faint, knowing curve of his mouth. The light above us buzzed louder, and when I blinked, he was gone. The bed was empty, but on the metal railing, smeared faintly in blood, were 2 prints. Not handprints, thumbprints. After that, I started seeing small things. Shadows that didn't belong to anyone. Footsteps where there shouldn't be any. But I never told anyone. Nobody wants to hear about ghosts in a psych ward. They'd say it was stress, sleep deprivation, and maybe it was. Until the night everything came full circle. It was my last month on the job. I was working another overnight shift when the intercom crackled on its own. Just a burst of static, then a voice. "Soft, come. I want to kill myself." The same words the man with the knife had shouted years before. Except this time, the voice wasn't coming from the lobby. It was coming from the empty observation room. I ran down the hall, heart pounding. The light inside flickered again, and for just a second I saw both of them standing there. The man with the knife, the man with no thumbs. One holding the weapon, the other holding out his hand. Then they were gone. All that remained was a faint metallic smell, like blood that had dried years ago. The doctors later told me that sometimes trauma repeats itself in places like this. That memory can stain walls the way blood does. Invisible to most, but never really gone. Maybe they were right. But here's the strange thing. After that night, the violence stopped. No more walk-ins with weapons. No more attacks. Even the patients seemed calmer. Ross retired not long after. I left too. But every now and then, I still dream about that place. In the dream, I'm sitting at the front desk again. The lights are flickering. The monitors hum. And through the static, I hear that same calm voice. "I want to kill myself." Except now, it's followed by another voice. Quiet, steady. "No, you don't." Then the lights come back on. I've come to believe that maybe not every haunting is meant to scare. Some are just echoes, repeating themselves until someone finally listens. And maybe, just maybe, those 2 men, broken in their own ways, found something in each other that the rest of us never could. Something that made them stop. Maybe they found peace.